That was Leah Schuman, David's niece. She's a magnificent trumpet player, teaches at the Vandercook College of Music in Chicago. So thank you, Leah, for the music. That was awesome. All right, so my name is Ben Schuman. I was David's son. I want to start off by just expressing my sincerest gratitude to everybody for showing up. It means a lot. It means a lot to see so many familiar faces. Frankly, it means a lot to see so many unfamiliar faces that my father touched throughout his life. You have the programs, but for the celebration of David's life today, we'll hear some short words from close friends and family, followed by an informal gathering. He wasn't a big fan of the open mic format, so we're going to skip that. That said, if you have any good stories, you can find me hovering around the bar probably after this. I'll stay until they kick us out if you need me to. Before we get to the speakers, I do want to recognize just a couple of people in attendance. Nobody could build a life like David did without some help along the way, but there are two people that to me really stood out. The first is his mentor, the Honorable Hans Lindy. When my dad was finishing up law school at age 40, a year older than I am today, he was conflicted between this life of contemplation and intellectual pursuits that he led at Deep Springs College and left behind, and his new law career and the stability that he had long craved, especially for his family. The experience of clerking for Judge Lindy and the decades of guidance that David received helped him forge a path that embraced and even leveraged both his ideals and his ambitions. So I'm just beyond grateful to you, Judge Lindy, for coming down here at 96 years old. We can even throw a round of applause if we want. Why not? Keep this thing a little more lively. So the next one, and she's going to get pissed at me for doing this, but I want to acknowledge my dad's partner for 51 years, my mom, Sharon Schuman. I really don't know who he would have been without a sounding board of equal brilliance, drive, and especially character. Quite frankly, he also would have been pretty helpless in his day-to-day life without her. So thank you, Mom, for your role in everything that everybody's going to talk about today. It was truly indispensable, no joke. So with that, glad I got through that, onto the program. So, yeah, definitely. Yeah, don't want to get nervous and skip Mom's applause. That wouldn't go over well. So our first speaker is Nick Lovrich. He was one of my dad's closest friends for almost 60 years, 57 years. Nick and my dad met in the freshman dorm at Stanford and were able to stay in pretty close touch as Nick settled just up the street at Washington State teaching political science and public policy. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Nick.
Good afternoon. First, a story with Justice Lindy as the topic. So David was all excited about being chosen to clerk for Justice Lindy, and he tells me one day, he calls and says, "Nick, there's a copy of Judicature on the judge's desk." And he's looking at an article on judicial elections. And he says, "That's my student who wrote that article, Chuck Sheldon." And David looks and he says, "Well, the co-author is Nick Lovrich. He was my roommate." That was even better. So I was planning to have a brunch, one of those famous brunches in Eugene with David next week. And I'm coming to give a talk at OSU next week. And so Sharon and David were going to meet me at the airport at 9:10 and 9:10. And go have brunch. That's not going to happen. So in looking at Facebook after David's passing, I saw so many stories of the very same thing that I experienced with David. But one story really got me. It was a young lady. I think she was either a clerk for David when he was a judge or a student in law school. I've been practicing this in my mind. I can't do it. It's really hard, but She said, I love David. He had faith in me when no one else did. So my story with David, we weren't roommates at Stanford. He had another roommate and I had a roommate. But I was, in my youth, I wasn't very wise. I was out of my element, and I'm playing baseball, leadoff batter for the Stanford Frosh against the varsity. And my first pitch at the plate is thrown by a person who's going to be a Cy Young Award winner. I didn't even see the bar. My God, what am I doing up here? I can't play at this level. And then I found out that one of David's friends knew the editor of the Stanford Daily, and he had been doing a story and uncovered the fact that every year at Stanford University, they admit 40 people who wouldn't be admitted otherwise. This relates a little bit to the scandal now about admission to elite schools. So I thought, but at the time I wasn't thinking that. I was just thinking, what is this person telling me this story about? Of course, he says, well, Nick, you're one of the 40. You really shouldn't be here. And I thought, shit, I shouldn't be here? I can't play ball at this level? This is really bad. And I was involved in Rush, and I got drunk and I did something really bad, and I damaged some property. And the honor code required that I go and confess that. So I did, and I was suspended from the university. My parents don't know this. I don't think Catherine or Nicole know this. And my suspension was suspended. Then I have to wear suspenders. And I thought, what the hell is this? What does this mean? Well, you're allowed to come back, but these are the conditions. You can't play baseball here anymore. You can't be a member of a fraternity, and you're going to go into counseling with our dorm, the student that is always there at undergraduate dorm. He was a law school student at the time. Really wonderful person. And they were concerned. They put me on suicide watch because I didn't really know how would I tell my parents about this. I'm a first-generation college kid. My parents never went past the 5th grade. It was a great honor for their son to be admitted to Stanford University. I have to go home in total disgrace. So my dorm advisor said, Nick, you're in deep trouble. And who comes to the door but David? All of my fair weather friends disappeared. They blew off to the winds. There's David. David, come on in. I want to help with this situation. What do you want to do? I don't want Nick to go home. I don't want him to transfer to UCLA and play baseball there. I want him to stay at Stanford. And I want to be his roommate next year, and the year after, and the year after that. That's why we're friends for 60 years. So for that young lady that loves David because he saw something that she didn't see, no one else could see. He did that his whole life. He did that as an 18-year-old person, not as a learned person, not as a holder of BA in psychology and PhD in literature and a JD, but he had it from here in his heart from the very beginning. So I don't want to be sad, although I'm sad. I want to be glad to be like David. He said, you know, Sharon, if I got hit by a truck, I had a good life. Well, if I get hit by a truck, I've had a good life thanks to David Schuman. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nick. So our next speaker is Garrett Epps. Garrett and my dad met in about 1991 when Garrett interviewed for a job here at the law school. They became really good buddies very quickly with a shared love of legal scholarship, writing, and above all, I think some sarcastic jokes over a good dinner perhaps Mexican food. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Garrett.
So this is the third time I've been asked to give a tribute to David Schuman. The first one was given when he left U of O Law to become Deputy Attorney General. And the title of that speech was Top 10 Reasons Why We U of O Law Faculty Say Good Riddance to David Schuman. That seems kind of cold, I'm sure, but the top reason was, number one, now finally someone else will have a chance to be considered the best teacher at U of O Law for a change. Jeez, right? The second tribute I gave at an Oregon bar gathering to celebrate, among other things, David's retirement from the appellate bench. And in that, I told the audience that I knew David, I knew intimately the contribution David had made, the changes he had brought to appellate law in Oregon, because he had brought the same change to U of O, and that was the custom of the ever so discreet afternoon nap, which we had come to call at the U of O, excuse me, I have to go and take a quick Schuman. So as you can see, a certain kind of humor was an important part of our friendship, and I'll start with some of that. I first suspected that David's sober exterior hid reserves of mischief when, in my first year here, he came to me and said he wanted me to call, and as I recall, wake up his daughter Rebecca on her 16th birthday and sing 16 Candles over the phone. This seemed very random to me. I said, won't she just think I am some kind of pervert? And David looked at me with a level glance and said, what's your point? He was my senior tenured colleague. I made the call, right? And my friendship with Rebecca recovered a decade later or so. But at any rate, that year my family and David bonded in particular over a shared love of Eugene's many Mexican restaurants. And on one of those occasions, he told me that his favorite sentence in the entire English language was, sir, be careful, the plate is very hot. Much to his regret, later he became associate dean of the law school, which is a lot like running a daycare center, only not as dignified or clean. We in the tenured faculty had nothing else to do, and so we engaged in email flame wars, and I remember one that was particularly savage, though for the life of me I can't remember what it was about, but I do know that my antagonist had committed a very serious jurisprudential error. It was glaring, it was obvious, it was hanging out there. I was ready to crush him with a response that they would still be talking about in the faculty lounge today, complete with law French. And I got an email from Dean Schuman saying, Garrett, there is a fellow human being standing on a high ledge. You have the chance to push him off. Is that what you want to do? And the answer was, yes, it's what I want to do. Schuman had rather gently spoiled my fun. He was a man of moderate habits, but he did enjoy the fruit of the grape, particularly Oregon Pinot Gris, but I only saw it affect him once. And that was at a dinner to honor a visit by Justice Lindy to the law school and a lecture at which we went to a dinner afterwards hosted by a faculty colleague who was quite a wine connoisseur, and David was sitting next to this colleague who kept ordering better and better bottles of wine, and David, of course, to be polite, sampled each one. I, as it happened, luckily or unluckily, was seated at the other end of the table next to Justice Lindy. Now, I don't know how many of you have tried to keep up with Justice Lindy's mind while sober, but it is not possible to do it if you've been drinking. And so I barely got to eat, much less drink. And at the end of the evening, I said to David, you know, I think probably I should give you a ride home. We got in the car and we were driving, and I said, David, it's good that you took this ride with me. It was probably not a good thing for you to drive. And he said, nonsense. I am as sober as a judge. And he thought for a minute, and then he said, that's because I am a judge. We got home without any mishap, and we never actually spoke of that ride again. But, you know, particularly when sober, being a judge was very important. I think it was a life goal for David that he really relished in achieving. And he always reminded me in his conduct as a judge of one of my favorite passages from Scripture in the first book of Kings. Solomon, the greatest king of Israel, before he ascends the throne, prays to God not for power or success or victory in battle, but he says to God, he asks God for what we might call judicial temperament today. He says, give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. And that is what David brought to the bench, an understanding heart. He loved judging. He savored each of the 600 and more opinions he wrote, and never regarded any case as unimportant. Believe me, that is true. When he first went on the bench, having been Deputy Attorney General, he was conflicted out of a lot of cases, except for workers' compensation cases. So I can remember 2 years of lunch at Glenwood in which there would be a description of the horrible misfortune that had led a block of ice to fall on the claimant, creating multiple contusions and lacerations, but was inexplicably denied by the administrative law judge. And his passion for the law was so great that he made these cases interesting, somewhat, most of the time. You know, looking back at David's life, you could see him as embodying paradox. He was calm and quiet, but he was drawn to people, big, loud people. He found them interesting. He was a brilliant athlete, but he never was a sports bore to people like myself who are not athletes. He had a wicked sense of humor. He never, to my knowledge, used it to hurt anyone. He enjoyed hearing gossip, but was quite reluctant to pass it on. If you told him a secret, it was a secret. He had a ferocious intellect and profound learning. He had very little tolerance for shoddy reasoning, but he never made a student or a colleague feel inadequate. And for that reason, students at all levels of ability and achievement regarded him as a friend, as a mentor, as the person who was on their side. And he took great pleasure when they succeeded in later life. I don't think this is paradox, actually. I think they are the marks of someone who was what I would call a complete person, who had lived a complete life, who had lived the life he chose and had achieved the things he wanted and had let himself know it, let himself feel it. And in his life, there was so much richness. He loved being with his family. The last time I saw him, we had a long account of a family holiday in Italy in which each member of the family had found some way to have a good time. The memory of that, the vivid, detailed memory of that trip is a blessing to me, and I wasn't even there. Imagine what it's like to them. He also loved the law as much as anybody I've ever seen, and often said that being a law professor was the most luxurious life he could imagine because he could think about what the law should be as well as what it was, and think about both sides of a case instead of one. He had a lifetime worth of wonderful encounters with law, beginning with his clerkship with Justice Lindy, which meant the world to him, teaching at U of O, visionary work at the Department of Justice as a Deputy Attorney General, carrying on the Lindy tradition as a judge at the Court of Appeals, and finally ending his days as a kind of tutelary spirit at the law school, respected and admired by everyone. He also loved outdoor sports, he loved food and wine, he was an artist at friendship and at good times. And in the 3 decades I knew him, almost every day he spent provided these pleasures. And with the fullness of his life, it gave him a kind of generosity as a friend. He could be prodigal with his time and attention the way a millionaire can be with wealth. Whenever I was lucky enough to spend time with him, I never once felt his mind was elsewhere. Each encounter was complete in itself. And I never, ever came away thinking that I had made a false step, that I had said something that was not understood, that I'd given offense, that I had not said something that needed to be said. And I think for each of his friends, he offered that special kind of peace. When the news of his passing was announced, one former student offered a tribute on Facebook that began, "Who else but Judge Schuman would start a legislative and administrative process course by reading T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land?" Eliot came to my mind too when I realized that he was gone. And I'd like to borrow a phrase from the poet and say that for those of us who knew and loved him, he was the still point of our turning world.
All right, the unfortunate task of following Garrett will go to Alicia Sikora and Bob Rockland. Alicia first met my dad in law school in 1994 and was one of his favorite mentees, if that's not like a favorite child or something, and a great friend for 25 years. Bob worked with my dad at the Department of Justice, Court of Appeals, and here at the law school. But most importantly, they were both really good cycling buddies of my dad's. That's how I knew them best. Alicia stands out as someone, to me, who had the rare ability to actually humble my dad on a long bike ride. Bob, not so much, man, but he tried. But the fact that he would slow his pace a little bit for the companionship really said a lot. If anyone knows my dad, he was very passionate about his cycling metrics, and so slowing down for you probably meant you were a great friend of his. So with that, I'll hand it over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, Rebecca, Ben, and David's family. David was a teacher, a mentor, and a friend to so many of us. Teaching constitutional law, administrative law, criminal law, grading papers, counseling students, raising a family, advising agencies and supervising attorneys as Deputy Attorney General, writing 672 opinions as an appellate judge, biking tens of thousands of miles. He always had time to buy a Glenwood meal for students, clerks, mentees, and friends. He always made time for us. He was a man of consistency and habit and humor. His dear friend, Melissa Aubin, recalls how by July, his hands bore the symmetrical spots of tan lines by his cycling gloves. They looked like the footprints of storybook lion cubs. We recall how he'd stay for exactly half a concert because intermission was after his bedtime. We recall how he'd have the Angelis burrito, sour cream on the side, paired with Pinot Gris. We know he'd visit his grandchildren by himself sometimes, in his words, so he could hog the baby. We know how important Sharon, Rebecca, Ben, and his family was to him. Rebecca, every time we went to a restaurant and a three-tined fork appeared on the table, your dad would hoist it aloft and say, "When Rebecca was a toddler, you know what she called a three-tined fork?" And I'd pretend like he hadn't told the story 20 times before. And he'd say with glee, "A threek, get it?" And Ben, in our constitutional law class one year, he quoted a new, important U.S. Supreme Court opinion. And then he paused and said, "You know, as my son in high school would say, duh." And Sharon, when you ordered gelato after dinner, and he wouldn't, we all knew he was going to eat more than half of it anyway. He so loved your 50th anniversary trip to Italy with family. He and I did have a shared love of constitutional law and biking and kvetching. He could do all three at once. This August, we completed the 75-mile, 17th annual Tour de Schuman, a famous bike ride in Bend. He was stronger than ever. Once after a long tour, the only Sun River breakfast restaurant open was Rat Hole Brewing. David ordered an egg white omelet because, of course. The server said, "No, our eggs are pre-mixed." David looked and then looked away and said, "Ugh, this is gonna be a real shit show." It was. Well, life will continue to be a shit show, but without you, David, it will never be the same shit show. I'll conclude now with words that are not mine. This is songwriter Bruce Springsteen. Well, they built the Titanic to be one of a kind, but many ships have ruled the seas. They built the Eiffel Tower to stand alone, but they could build another if they please. The Taj Mahal, the pyramids of Egypt, are unique, I suppose. But when they built you, brother, they broke the mold. Now the world is filled with many wonders under the passing sun. And sometimes something comes along, and you know it's for sure the only one. The Mona Lisa, the David, the Sistine Chapel, Jesus, Mary, and Joe. And when they built you, brother, they broke the mold. When they built you, brother, they turned dust into gold. When they built you, brother, they broke the mold. They say you can't take it with you, but I think that they're wrong, because all I know is I woke up this morning and something big was gone. Gone into that dark ether where you're still young and hard and cold. Just like when they built you, brother, they broke the mold. And now your death is upon us, and we've returned your ashes to the earth. And I know you'll take comfort in knowing you've been roundly blessed and cursed. But love is a power greater than death, just like the songs and stories told. And when she built you, brother, she broke the mold. That attitude's a power stronger than death, alive and burning or stone cold. When they built you, my brother.
Thank you, Alicia. I always referred to David as my cycling partner. After all, we probably rode between 10 and 15,000 miles over the last 18 years. But he was, of course, much more than that. Friend, mentor, carpool mate, and at times my boss. Today I'd like to share a few memories of David, the supercyclist. Instead of relying on my memory, I did as David would have me do. I went back to the record. Text messages and emails we exchanged over the years. David was a great cycling partner, except for one thing, as Ben suggested. He was too damn fast. In fact, last year, and few people know this, I think, he set a world speed record. May 8th, 2018. David emailed to tell me that he had read that the world record in the over 70 age group for a metric century, that's 100 kilometers or 62 miles, was 3 hours, 35 minutes. He wrote, quote, "Intrigued, I wondered what I could do on my 74th birthday." Well, in fact, his time, 3 hours, 25 minutes, 10 minutes faster. David was as loyal a cycling partner as he was a fast one. August 28th, 2015. We had planned to ride a full century together, 100 miles. "Bob," he wrote, quote, "I can no longer live with my guilty conscience. I feel as though I'm living a lie. I must confess and seek absolution. I have betrayed you. There, I said it." Here are the sordid details. He explained how he had decided to ride a century before we did because of the weather and various other bad excuses. He continued, quote, "If you can find it in your heart to overlook this one transgression, let's ride tomorrow. If you can't join me, or if my sin has been so shameful that you cannot forgive, then I will once again have to brave the elements by my miserable self," unquote. Well, as we've heard, David was a proud father and grandfather. May 22nd, 2018. I texted David, "Hey, nice interview with Rebecca in St. Louis Magazine." Now, as you know, it's sometimes hard to discern nuanced tones in text messages. Nonetheless, I interpreted his response as a perfect mixture of both pride and disappointment. Quote, "Agreed, no F-bombs." My last text exchange with David was on Erev Rosh Hashanah, the night before the Jewish New Year. Here's what he said, quote, "You can get your New Year exercise tomorrow by going to shul and davening all day, or by joining me on a cold but sunny, all caps, bike ride. Which will it be?" Well, the answer was easy, of course. So I said, "What time are we leaving?" His response, 9:30, bring your yarmulke. As I've said many times over the years, David, thanks for the ride.
That was great. Thank you, Bob and Alicia, both. So we'll break from the speakers for just a minute to hear one of my dad's favorite bluegrass tunes, Foggy Mountain Breakdown, played by my mom's buddy Jim Dotson and some of his friends. that was really good. I wish I knew everybody's name to acknowledge them all, but nobody gave me that information. So we'll just have to go with Jim Dotson and his friends, but that was awesome, and we'll hear one more from them before the afternoon is concluded. So next, we'll have a eulogy from David's younger sister, Sarah. Sarah Dietz.
Schuman is fine. Hi, everyone. I wish I'd gone first so I didn't have to follow all those great talks, but I'm gratified and impressed by all of you here who knew David from the many areas of his admirable life. Students and colleagues from the law school and the court, cycling companions, folks from his dining group, school friends and family. But there's only two of us here who grew up with him and watched him become the sainted David of his adult life. David and his three siblings were all shaped in large part by life in the Schuman home. It was headed by our stay-at-home mother, who totally gave of herself to her family, and by our father, who, like David, was an attorney dedicated to the law and to his family, a community activist devoted to helping the downtrodden, and an athlete with Olympic potential who died suddenly while engaged in a sport he loved. I was asked the other evening if we discussed books at the dinner table. While books were a constant presence in our home, I don't remember that we discussed books much, but we did discuss ideas. More often, we engaged in fun. Though I didn't realize it at the time, what we were doing was reveling in each other's company. For example, a recurring event at our table was the Schuman seed spitting contest. While the rest of us were content to sit in our seats and aim our watermelon seeds or cherry pits at the target spinning on the Lazy Susan in the center of the table, David would hang by his knees from the nearby chinning bar while he aimed. No doubt he still won, as his athletic prowess was evident even then. In addition to seed spitting, David excelled at intramural gymnastics, but as with others in our family, his primary sport as a child was speed skating. Because he was older than I was, he was my companion and chauffeur to daily skating practices as soon as he got his driver's license. It was on those drives that David introduced me to my first and last cigarette. Off the ice, he perfected a skill called an ear stand, and you can just imagine what it was because it's indescribable. And on family car trips, he performed this stunt at every attraction. Long before any toy company invented the slip and slide, David returned from a baseball game on a rainy day and demonstrated the fun he had had sliding into second. We all joined him running and sliding in the backyard, and the lawn was never the same. But as our dad said, anything is all right and fun. He uttered those fateful words when David and our older brother Sam were trying to balance glasses of milk on the back of their hands at dinner one night. Our mother objected, as what sane mother wouldn't, and that's when our dad said, anything is all right and fun. So the next thing you knew, our long-suffering mother had the whole pitcher of milk, which she unceremoniously dumped on our dad. All in fun. Our parents looked the other way when fun-loving David developed the hobby in high school of borrowing street signs. His bedroom walls were full of admonitions to stop, yield, be quiet for hospital zone, or only go one way, and so on. This was the boy I knew who became your adored judge and professor. Our mother fondly referred to David's high school gang of friends as the Crud Hounds. By high school, David had developed an important life skill. He could say anything, even negative or insulting comments, with a winning smile and a charming voice. So you didn't know he'd said anything nasty, and everybody reacted positively. You all would know better than I do. Did he use this skill in his adult life and his law career? When David went off to Sanford and then a semester abroad in Italy, he came back a changed person. During the brief time he spent at home before going back to California, David, who had never shown the least interest in classical music, spent most of his time listening to the Tchaikovsky violin concerto and mooning over some unknown girl named Sharon. When we finally met her, our family welcomed Sharon into our midst, and I hope she knew then and knows now that she is one of us. The night before their wedding, I stayed with the couple in their San Francisco apartment, concerned that I would be shocked when Sharon was still at David's apartment in the morning. Before I went to sleep, David came to me and solemnly announced, "Sharon and I are living in sin." As an adult, David watched with bemusement as Sharon and I spent long hours playing with sticky strips of paper to create works of art or other equally as mature pastimes. He struggled with me, as did Sharon and my husband, when we went backpacking in the inconsolable range in the Sierras. Or were they the inconvenience or the incontrovertibles or the incomparables? By the second day, we had called those darn mountains so many in-words that to this day, I'm really not sure what they were actually called. We took that trip to the Sierras when David and Sharon were teaching English at nearby Deep Springs College, a very small liberal arts school located on an isolated working cattle ranch and built on 3 pillars of academics, student self-government, and manual labor. The Schumans lived at Deep Springs when Rebecca was born, and I clearly remember an eloquent letter David wrote describing his drive back from the hospital to Deep Springs as the sun rose over the mountains, saying he felt like God himself. Many do not remember that prior to his career in the law, David, a Renaissance man, was an accomplished English professor. No doubt the clarity and elegance of his legal writings were enhanced by this background. David and Sharon also taught briefly at a college in New Orleans. Our visits there often featured 2 of David's contradictory tendencies, namely appreciation of fine food and a strong concern for health and fitness. One evening, after enjoying an incredible and incredibly large meal at a restaurant, David felt compelled to add up the calories he had just consumed and announce the results, which totaled nearly 5,000 for that one meal. And following the famous multi-course breakfast at Brennan's, featuring, among other things, pastries, eggs sardou, and bananas Foster, David amused our server and the rest of us by demanding sweet and low for his coffee. Our extended family, the descendants of our parents, holds a reunion every other year. Future gatherings will be duller without the wickedly sly humor of his honor. He kept us entertained with his dry wit, his acerbic observations, and his unintentional gaffes. How did that salsa end up on the ceiling anyway? The original Schuman cast of characters has changed, with only 2 of the original players still around. Please, Joe, stay healthy and safe. But the theme of the production is constant. Ours is still a family that revels in each other's company. With all of you, David's extended family of friends and colleagues, we will rally around Sharon, Rebecca, and Ben as they learn to live life without David. The Schuman family, the University of Oregon Law School, all of Oregon, and the world at large has been richer for David's presence in it and is the worse for his absence. As I said when our dad died, things may seem normal again, but the earth has shifted on its axis and will forever be out of kilter.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Next, we'll hear from my sister, Rebecca.
All right, so those of you who had the fortune of hearing my dad talk about my writing career may be expecting something that I wrote because I'm a professional, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read something that my dad wrote. Every year, when my brother and I were children, since we were born, every year he wrote us a letter on our birthdays, and then he didn't show them to anybody, and then when we turned 18, he bound them up into a book and gave them to us. And so nobody has ever read or heard this before but me. But maybe my mom, but she probably has forgotten about it. So those of you who knew him and heard him talk about us may think that he and I had the most idyllic and perfect relationship that any parent and child have ever had or ever will have, and largely that is true, but what you may not know is that for much of the year of 1988, when I was 11 and 12, I was the biggest pain in the ass brat that, I mean, I was just impossible. So this is the letter that he wrote me in honor of my 12th birthday. And buckle up, it's gonna be a thing. So first of all, my birthday is August 31st, and he wrote this on September 25th. September 25th, 1988. Dear Rebecca, I've waited almost a month from your birthday to write this letter. Several reasons contributed to this delay. One was simple procrastination. School started up for me shortly before your party, and I've been very busy, what with your mother working, you in gymnastics, Ben in soccer, etc. Oh, I totally forgot you played soccer. You played soccer. Another reason was that you had such a bad birthday. In fact, such a bad run of days around your birthday that I didn't feel in the proper frame of mind to write this annual letter across the years. Fewer and fewer years every August. You took your friends to play miniature golf for your party. After about 9 holes, that's very generous, it was probably 1 hole, it became evident that you were not a good miniature golf player. This is an understatement. I am extremely uncoordinated. I once, as an adult, bowled an 8. You began to pout, then you began to get mad, and you finally began to get mean and to cry. I'd say that what happened was a full-fledged temper tantrum. This was on your 12th birthday. I probably didn't handle it very well. I separated you from your friends and tried to talk sensibly and reassuringly, sorry, my father would not F up an adverb. Finally, you pulled yourself together, but not before seriously embarrassing yourself. I have done that so many times. It's impossible to count. Your friends, incidentally, were wonderfully supportive to you. That night before bed, you dissolved into tears of shame and remorse. Also very on brand. I mentioned the possibility you might want to talk to some sort of counselor about your difficulty with self-control. You took that to mean I thought you were wacko and needed a shrink. I was not woke when I was 12 about the challenges of mental health. I apologize for that language. And this incident was not isolated. You have a problem with self-control. Okay, in my defense, I was a 12-year-old girl, like puberty everywhere. Like, yeah, I was probably a little bit worse than your average 12-year-old, but not that much, maybe. Since that time, you've improved quite a bit. Maybe you got yourself overexcited about 1, your birthday, 2, the beginning of school, or 3, the return of your friend Star from California, where she had been living. Maybe you were over-fatigued from a summer of 7 a.m. to 12:30 gymnastics workouts. Maybe you had low blood sugar. In any event, it quite upset me. I finally arrived at a theory. You are so self-demanding that when you fail to achieve satisfactory results with something, you feel you need punishment. So you pout or withdraw or get upset. We then get upset at you for this behavior. You take that as our refusal to recognize your sense of failure. This forces you to act so bad that we have to be mad at you. Then you get mad at us, and the cycle builds. What you really want us to do in the first place, I think, is not chastise you for pouting, crying, or withdrawing, but to understand and acknowledge these feelings, and if we could at the same time indicate that we disapproved of your method of dealing with them, that would be perfect. Ever the jurist. I've tried this a few times and it seems to help. It breaks the cycle of self-punishment. So much for that. Perhaps this coming year will find you dealing with that problem differently. Sorry. Your 11th year continued your love affair with gymnastics. You had a mildly successful season of competition as a class 4. That was definitely not true. I was a horrible failure. Ending with a disappointing failure to qualify for the state meet. That happened at the sectional meet in Salem. You fell off the beam, lost your confidence, and generally had a terrible time. You were so sad, I thought I would die of heartbreak just watching you. After the meet, we stood hugging each other on a dark and quiet street outside the gym. You racked with sobbing, My silent pain probably as bad as yours. By the time we found a pizza parlor and ran into some of your teammates, you were largely recovered. You laughed and had fun. Within a few days, you seemed much better. Largely because you retained the hope of moving up to Class 3, even though you hadn't qualified for state. Your coach waffled about that for about a month. Each waffle brought tears or hope. Finally, he agreed to let you work out with the Class 3s provisionally over the summer. You worked hard, and by September, you were a permanent Class 3. It's true. I kicked ass. I was like better than some of the people who teased me for not being, you're not supposed to be here, Becky. And then I beat them. Yesterday, you had your third meet and you performed remarkably well, earning an all-around score of 31.6. That is not a very good score. You seem to be somewhat more in control of your feelings. Ever the optimist. I nearly burst with pride, not at your score, but at your strength, your beauty, your grace. Many of the year's moments in retrospect seem to involve gymnastics. Me driving you home from practice, going to meets in Portland, sharing the high and low moments. Other moments. Last week, we were eating breakfast at the Glenwood, and I looked over at you and suddenly saw that you were a woman. You were telling the waitress your order. When did that happen? How did that happen? What will become of us? Again, we took a trip to California this summer, and I remember your literal joy at the Berkeley family camp, swimming, giggling at the camp-style meals, frolicking with your friend Jessica. You slipped on Beaver Creek Rock and skinned your knee. God, I love you, Rebecca. Can I please take all your pain? I would do that gladly if I could. I'm afraid I can't. I guess you come by your highs and lows honestly. You are energetic, talkative, upbeat, funny, and then you are sulky, energetic, self-punishing, angry. And me? This has not been a pleasant year for me. From August until March, I was under scrutiny at the U of O Law School, trying to get a tenure-track position. Many people who should not have been in a position to do so were passing judgment upon me. That's right, motherfuckers. Are some of you still here? I finally got an offer in mid-March. We all went out to eat at Ambrosia for pizza. I was ecstatic. A life job here in Eugene, doing what I love and do well, with opportunity to do well and do good. I couldn't believe it. I shouldn't have. In mid-April, 2 students, goaded on by one of my colleagues, you know who it was. Oh, I lost my place from all my shit thrown. Began a long, loud, and public protest of my appointment, alleging that racism had provoked the faculty into hiring me, an insider and a mediocrity. Newspaper and television stories ensued, as did several lengthy investigations. The result was a confirmation of my appointment. The Register Guard ultimately ran a complimentary editorial about me, which prompted 2 nasty responses. I tried to stay aloof and lived from day to day. Since June, when the university's investigations ended, until last week, I have slowly been recovering my sanity, hoping all along that the student grievance would not choose to renew their attacks by way of a lawsuit. Finally, I found out that this is what they intend to do. Don't know where you are, but I still 100% hate you. I haven't slept very well or had much of an appetite since. I'm afraid of what is going to happen. Will I be able to weather another ordeal of publicity and anger? Will I be able to put my colleagues and friends through the ordeal of a public trial just to keep my job? Or will I quit and go back to work in Salem at the Supreme Court or the DOJ? Where will I be on your next birthday? Why do I have to ask that every fall? I really thought this one might be different. And I'm so glad that that did not end up being the case. I hope my problems have not caused yours. I hope my pain has not infected you. I hope the bad publicity has not carried over into your life. One day last month, we measured you and discovered that you had grown 4 inches last year. I suspect there is a lot of powerful change going on in you, emotionally and physically. I hope you are able to deal with it, learn from it, enjoy it. I suspect you will, but that you will have some pain along the way. Meanwhile, here's the moment I want to remember from this year. It is early August and hot in the Gymnastics Academy parking lot. I've just found out from Coach Dick that you will be able to stay in Class 3. Your major goal, it seems. I tell you, you beam, you give me a high five, and I take you home in the car. I love you more every year, Rebecca, no matter what. Remember that, always. Happy birthday, Dad.
That was great. So I just reread my letters as well a couple of nights ago, and in 1988, by December, he only made a passing reference to what we referred to as white male gate, which was the controversy here at the law school, but the mini golf thing was definitely referred to in my letter. So he was still stewing on that in December. But those letters were truly a pleasure, and I hope to get back on writing those to my kids as well. So our last speaker will be a good friend of my mother's, Jenny Jonak. She's going to read something that Sharon put together.
I'm sorry. Sharon's Reflections. David was not a big fan of lamentations at funerals. In fact, he said, "Don't have a gathering for me unless it's fun." In that spirit, I would like to share with you the one instance when the worlds of law and family overlapped. That was when David found it necessary to create the dog contract. To understand this document, you need to know that David did not like dogs, in spite of the fact that when he was a toddler, his neighbor's boxer saved David's life by standing behind that neighbor's car and barking to prevent it from backing over the baby. Instead of being filled with gratitude, at the age of 10, David embarked on a terror campaign against the dogs on his paper route. He used his Little League skills to aim each paper at a dog. One day, a gate got left open, and he got bitten. Failing to see the justice in this retribution, from that moment forth, David hated dogs. So it was not a surprise that he requested from me a prenuptial promise: never bring a dog into our home. I had grown up with and loved dogs, but the glow of romance made me agree. Fast forward half a century. About 8 years ago, David asked me one day, "What is it that you want?" I think he was expecting an answer like, "To see Africa," or "to write another book." Instead, I said, "A dog." He laughed, but the next day he said, "You were joking about the dog, right?" When I responded, "Not really," you could see that he was irritated. He said, "But we had an agreement." I responded, "Statute of limitations." I let it go, though. That was when Ben and Rebecca began their campaign. Mom needs a dog. They did not get very far until one day Rebecca said, "Dad, you know how Mom likes to micromanage everything? If she had a dog, she would leave you in peace." That argument must have carried weight because when Chanukah came, among my presents was a small package that contained a dog leash. Tacit consent. At this moment, before the dog actually entered our house, I was presented with the dog contract, parts of which I will now read. Whereas important family decisions involving David Schuman, hereafter husband, and Sharon Schuman, hereafter wife, have been made by consensus, and Whereas for 43 years, husband has blocked the acquisition of a dog by withholding his agreement. And whereas husband has been subjected to a ceaseless 43-year nagathon, attempting to secure husband's agreement, an attempt into which wife has recently conscripted husbands and wife's children, Benjamin and Rebecca, numerous other relatives and family friends, and husband's and wife's granddog, Charlie. And whereas husband has decided that prudence and familial tranquility require a reevaluation of his long-standing refusal to agree. Therefore, Section 1, Husband's Agreement. 1A, husband hereby agrees that husband and wife may acquire a dog. 1B, although wife has primary responsibility for selecting the dog, husband, in conformity with the long-standing policy of consensus in important family decisions, reserves the right to veto any selection for any reason whatsoever, including but not limited to size, breed, gender, temperament, age, or aesthetics. Husband agrees that his veto power will not be unreasonably exercised. Disputes as to what is reasonable will be resolved as set out in Section 4A. In consideration of husband's agreement, wife agrees as follows. 2A, wife agrees to take sole responsibility for the care, feeding, and maintenance of the dog, including but not limited to training, walking, grooming, transporting, making medical decisions, cleaning up after, and making temporary lodging arrangements. Although husband may, in his sole discretion, volunteer to take on such tasks, asking husband to volunteer, either directly or indirectly, by word or deed, shall be considered a breach of this dog contract, thereby allowing imposition of any of the remedies described in Section 3A below. 2D, wife, on behalf of dog, agrees that dog will not bite husband or any other person over the age of 10 more than one time in any 12-month period. 1 means the sum of bites to all persons over the age of 10 and not the sum to any one person. Thus, for example, if dog bites husband once and a stranger once, dog has breached this provision. Dog may bite wife at will. Section 3F. Wife, on behalf of dog, agrees that after dog has been with family for 6 months so as to permit training, dog will not habitually chase bicyclists or newspaper delivery personnel. Section 3G. Wife, on behalf of dog, agrees that dog will not unreasonably bark during husband's normal sleeping hours. If dog does so, husband reserves the right to isolate dog in some place where dog's barking will not be heard by husband or the family's neighbors. If the only way to stop dog from such barking is for some person to get out of bed without delay and devote attention to dog, wife agrees to be that person. Remedies for material breach. Section 3A. The remedies for breach of this agreement by wife or dog include, but are not limited to, placement of dog with A, another family, B, a dog rescue association, or C, a humane society. Section 3B. The remedy for breach of husband's promise to agree that the family may acquire a dog under the terms set out in this contract is as follows. Wife may acquire a dog without limitation. Miscellaneous, Section 4A. Any disputes arising under this agreement will be resolved by submitting the dispute to a neutral arbitrator to be mutually agreed upon by husband and wife. If husband and wife cannot agree on a neutral arbitrator, husband will select one person to serve as arbitrator, wife will select one person, and the 2 people selected will select a third. The arbitrator's decision will be final and non-appealable. Section 4B. This agreement is the complete agreement between the parties until revoked in writing. It replaces any prior agreement, written or oral. Since the dog contract was created, about once a year, when the dog has done something especially egregious, David has reminded me of it. But my response has always been something like, I never signed that contract. Or, didn't you get a C+ in contracts from Jim Mooney? Meanwhile, on more than one occasion, I caught David sitting on the TV room couch, possibly petting the dog, Billy Budd, while he watched the Tour de France. I have no idea how long it took the author of over 600 appellate opinions to create this contract, but I'm sure he had fun doing it. His sense of humor was a great defense against the absurdities of the world. In the face of power abused, exploitation of the vulnerable, and assaults on justice, equality, and the rule of law, David felt an obligation to try to protect democracy itself. As we move beyond today, I hope that we can all use our own very different skills and passions to continue this work. The path is not terribly easy. What David knew is that we make it bearable by our ability to laugh.
All right, thanks a lot, again, everybody, for coming. My dad was not a huge Duck fan, casual fan at best, but he would appreciate those that are part of that religion, myself included, for coming, missing the end of the game. And you guys should know, if you didn't look at your phones already, 35-31, Ducks won, so yeah. And with that, I think we'd appreciate if you'd sit and listen to the band play Cripple Creek, which I think was his favorite bluegrass song. And then after that, we can convene out here in the lobby. Thank you.